I hope you were able to do your homework this week. Homework's not thought in my mind, never has been. But we talked last week about, as we began this new series, about distractions. You know, the things that come in our minds and just distract us from doing all of our different things. And what our homework was consider some of the things we gave as options, things that you could do to just kind of unclutter your mind, to get rid of some of the things that distract you during the day. And just ask you to consider taking a social Sabbath. You know, just take a day of the week that you not get on social media, you don't get on anything like that, just let it go. News detox. You know, we do not need to listen to the news every single day for hours and hours, or an entertainment fast where you leave the games alone, phone-free mornings or evenings where you just leave the phone, silence notifications that we do not need to know every time somebody posts something on Facebook. Just turn those notifications off so you can have some uninterrupted time. Now, everybody was asked to choose one or two of those. With myself, Janice and I have talked about some things. One, news. I don't need to know any more about what's going on in Minneapolis. You know, you can't say it, but so many times. You know, so I don't need to know any more about that. So I'm not checking the news and things like that. Really cut down some time with others. One night, Janice and I just said, let's don't turn the TV on. So we just put music in the background, you know, just some oldies and goodies, you know, from the past, just listen to music. She was writing cards to some people in the church and around that had been sick, and I just was working, doing some paperwork. You know what? We survived the evening. You know, got some things done. You didn't have to have that TV on. So I hope you have chosen something, and you're going to work to just try to close out, get rid of some of the clutter in your mind. You know, because there's so many things that are vying for our time. And that's what this series that we're doing, What Was I Thinking, is all about. Because our lives, our thinking guides where our lives go. You know, our every change that we bring about, every major change that happens in life, there was a change in thinking before it happened. So that's how important it is. You know, it's important what goes in. That's why it's so important that we try to filter what our children hear, what they see on TV, because we know it's so important what they hear. But what about us as adults? Are we exempt from that it's important what we see and hear and how many hours of certain things? I don't think so. I think it's just as important for us. How about when we're caught in making the same mistakes? The changes we make, they just keep coming back. They don't ever stick, whatever we do. We're just stuck in life. We end up in the same place after we do make a change, but we find ourselves right back in the same place. You know, last week we talked about a change of thinking always precedes a changed life. And one of the illustrations we used from the Bible was the prodigal son. You know, the prodigal son, he was always welcome to go back home. His father always loved him. It was always a place for him. But he would not consider it until, as the Bible says, he came to his senses. He had a change of thinking. Then he would think about going home. You know, and that's what we're talking about, having a change of thinking. You know, one of the foundational scriptures for this whole series that we're going to be going through, is going to keep going back to, is 2 Corinthians. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verses 3 through 5, we read last week. We're going to read it again now. For though we live in the world, we do not wage war as the world does. You know, that's reminding them right off the bat, this is a war. The weapons we fight with are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We're dealing with God's power here. In the last verse, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. And I'm going to flip back to verse 4 here, because that's where we want to spend our time today, is talking about that word that's highlighted, or those words highlight, strongholds. We want to talk about demolishing strongholds in our life. When you hear the word stronghold, what do you think of? What picture do you have in mind? Well, I don't know what you have in mind, but I think it's always good to go back. What would have been in the minds of the original hearers of when this was spoken, demolish strongholds? Well, in this day, and written all the way through the Bible, Old Testament, New Testament, strongholds are mentioned. And they were always in the sense of a military significance, a strong fortress or a natural thing in the wilderness, or where it would be hard for somebody to attack you, sneak up on you. It talks about David hid out in the strongholds of the wilderness, a military fort, a castle, the city of Jericho, you remember that, the mighty walls. Jerusalem itself is built in a very defensible way. It's on a hill, and it has the high ground. Or maybe you've heard of Masada. Masada was in the Israel and Judah. Out in the plains, you can see the Dead Sea in the background there. It was a natural cliff plateau. King Herod was a very paranoid king, and he built a fortification there, a place to go. If you had as many enemies as King Herod did, and you were so mean to people, he had Masada as a place to retreat to if they ever attacked him. And it was set up with military barracks. There were cisterns dug in the rocks that caught the rainwater. They said there was enough food and ammunition, all the things that was needed, the water there to support an army for a year. And that was put to the test some years later. But when he was set a stronghold, these people had an idea. They had seen these things and what that stood for. So when Paul just talks about demolishing strongholds, they had a physical picture in their minds, but I think they're just like us too. They know some spiritual, emotional strongholds that's in our lives. And we picture those things. And why would Paul use stronghold when he's talking about living for Christ? Because he knows bad thinking develops strongholds, develops things in our way of thinking that holds us back. Bad thinking does those things. Well, how do you know you're under or you have a stronghold in your life? Well, one, they want to be intimidating. Strongholds want to be intimidating. The very fact that they're there are there to discourage us from attacking them. You know that feeling, that you've got a bad habit in your life or something you've done for a long time. You go, what's the use? What's the even use trying? I can't tear it down. And I tell you, our language betrays us. If you want to know you've got a stronghold in your life, we start saying things like, we start excusing behavior. Hey, that's just the way I've always been. You know my daddy, you know me. Let's just pass right down. You know, I have trouble with my temper. I've always had trouble with my temper. You know, and we use these excuses. That shows we've given up. Our stronghold has intimidated us that way, and it's become entrenched. Strongholds are usually built on lies. Strongholds are created, either natural or man-made. But at its foundation is always a lie. We tell ourselves lies about God. If you believe the lie that God doesn't care, that he doesn't exist, or that he doesn't forgive, that changes your whole outlook on how your life can move forward with God in your life. There's lies about ourselves. We've believed lies. If you've been told enough that you're not lovable, if you think in your mind that you're not lovable, that no one would want you, that rejection and abandonment in your past has made you who you are, then that's a stronghold. There's lies about life. We believe lies about life, and we believe stuff like, my desires are number one. And so if you believe that, then everything else comes behind that stronghold. If you believe that you can't let people see your imperfections, and you got to always be the smartest in the room or have the very best of everything, can't let them see you fail, then that's going to affect how you live life, how you push people away. You see, there's always a kernel of truth in all of the strongholds, but then they're twisted and built upon. The premise is flawed when we believe these things about life. There's a third one. Strongholds resist truth. They resist the truth. I love this story. Jesus was teaching, and some Jews had responded to his teaching and wanted to follow him. And Jesus says this to the group of people standing there in John chapter 8. Verse 31, he says this. He says, to the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and here we go, the truth will set you free. That's a wonderful thing, liberating, sets you free. But they answered him, we are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves to anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free? Did you see what happened here? Jesus tells the liberating truth. The truth of the gospel is going to set you free. And they go, who are you to tell us that we need to be set free? The truth offended them. And you can know that you have a stronghold in your life if the truth offends you. That's big warnings. That's a red flag. If the truth offends you, if you hear a sermon on, if you hear a sermon on money and it offends you, then you probably got a little problem with money. If it's a sermon that talks about alcohol use, you probably got a little stronghold in your life about alcohol. About language, well, you might, and that offends you, you probably got a problem with that. If about loving people, loving all kinds of people, and that makes you bristle a little bit, probably got a little problem there, a little stronghold. You see, anything that challenges our accepted way of thinking, that stronghold in our life, we bristle when we hear the truth. It doesn't liberate, it makes you angry. Another thing we find about a stronghold is that a stronghold directs our life. I am firmly convinced that some of the strongholds, most of the strongholds in our life, we don't even want to live that way. The things that are taking us in direction, we don't even want to live that way, but they are so entrenched in our way of life that we just keep going that way. It determines the direction of life. And if you've ever dealt with rejection in your past and you're afraid of trust, you will sabotage relationships even though your soul craves relationships. See what I mean? Romans 7:15 to me is a funny scripture, but it fits so well here. I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. If that's not the what was I thinking verse, what was I thinking? I didn't even want to do that. I want to do good, but I find myself doing the things that I don't want to do. I didn't want to curse again. I didn't want to lose my temper. I wanted to stay calm when I was talking to him. I didn't want to go out with the guys and drink too much again. All of these things. I end up doing the things I don't want to do because they're entrenched in our lives. I was a little boy, and where I'm from, you didn't have the amount of deer that you have here. But still, we had deer. And I remember the first time I ever saw a sign that said deer crossing. And that just didn't make sense to me. And I was going, how can you tell a deer where to cross the road? And I remember, just trying to picture Smokey Bear walking in the woods. Say, okay, guys, gather around. Guys, you bucks, put that cigarette out and get over here, And telling them, you're going to cross right over here. If you don't, you're going to get a ticket. And that's what I thought as a little boy. But quickly learned that, no, you're not telling the deer to cross there. That's where they cross. And the sign is to warn us, look out for deer. And when we moved here 35 years ago, the road we moved on, right inside of our house, is a deer crossing. 35 years, I think it's different deer, But they've learned that that's a deer crossing. And so we're very careful as you come to that spot. I can't tell you how many deer I've seen in 35 years just crossing at that one place. What's happened is, and has been passed down, as an entrenched crossing, a pathway has been made, and it's passed on to generations of deer that this is where we cross. This is where we cross the road here, through this field. It's in a pathway for us in our minds if we think it over and over and over and over and over and over, we wear a path in the way we think, and then everything that we think about that deals with, if you want a pathway about how you consider money, everything's going to be filtered down that pathway, or whatever it is. If we think money is our security, all money decisions go through that. If we think we must be the best and never admit we're wrong, everything is going down that pathway, and we will find a reason to not admit when we're wrong. If we believe that people cannot be trusted, then if we've heard that and believed that long enough, every person that comes along in their life, when they tell us something that we've got to choose whether to believe or not, we'll choose not to believe because you don't think you can believe people. Or if they try to tell you something that's for your own good, you won't listen. How are strongholds established? How did I get here? How did I get in this position? Well, scientists and the Bible tell you, you get to a place because you've heard something early and you've heard it often. It's been modeled for you. You've been seen. It's like you remember the scripture from Proverbs 22, verse 6, train a child in the way he should go, and then when he is old, he will not turn from it. Now, that's not a promise. That's a principle. That's a principle. You do this, and most of the time, that's the way it's going to work out. But the opposite is true. You can turn the positive into the negative. You teach somebody and tell them something long enough, most likely they're going to have bad behavior. Adults, young and old, what are you feeding yourself? What are you telling yourself early? What are you telling yourself often? I want to make a practical suggestion right here. We cannot go back and be children, amen? But we can choose when we hear about God, when God speaks to our life. A very valuable suggestion is start your day with God. That's mimicking the childhood. Start with God. Carve out time that you do things in the morning to hear about God before you hear about anything else. And you find ways throughout the day to hear it often. That's just a practical suggestion. Start your day with God. Unchallenged thinking is another way how we get there. We surround ourselves with affirming voices. Don't you agree with that? We surround ourselves with people who tell us the things that we already believe. That's just our human nature. A few years ago, we wouldn't even know what the word algorithm was. That would just be a word you had no idea. But all of us understand algorithms now because of the internet and social media and online sites. If you want to have some fun, if you can find somebody that will leave their phone unattended, take their phone and do some searches on their phone. Do stuff for body odor, toenail stuff, toenail funguses and stuff. Just do some searches on their phone. You know what's going to happen? They're going to get all these ads about body odor and deodorant and toenail fungus and things like that. And they'll go, why am I getting all these ads? And you go, I don't know. But if you want to have some fun, you establish the algorithms that. Well, it's not just shopping. We know that's true. But they will find out if you like a certain sports team. Guess what's going to happen? That's what you're going to hear. They find out that you have a political persuasion. That's what you're going to hear. And they're going to keep increasing and increasing to make you comfortable in what you believe. Because if you're comfortable on those sites, then you stay longer. You just keep on. So we go through life with no one challenging our thinking. And we develop those algorithms. That's how we get them. There's generational patterns that are there. Dolan's not here today. I think he's preaching up at Tarboro, but I think I heard Dolan say this probably 40 years ago, 30-some years ago in an illustration. You may have heard it several times, but the old story, the family was together for Christmas, and the new son-in-law said, why did you cut the end of the ham off before you cooked it? Said it to his new wife. She goes, oh, that's the way you cook a ham. He goes, why? How do you know that? He says, because Mom, that's the way she always cooks a ham. You cut the end off. So she's over in the other room, and he said, And she goes, Mom, don't you always cut the end of the ham off before you cook it? And she goes, well, of course you do, honey. You cut the end of the ham off. Well, why? Well, that's the way my mom did it. She always cut the end of the ham off. So she's in the living room there visiting with some aunts because they just walk in and say, Mama, did you always cut the end of the ham off? She could laugh. She goes, of course I did. Well, why did you cut the end of the ham off? My pan was too little. So you got 3 generations of ladies wasting good ham, because they thought that was the proper way. Generational things. So much stuff is passed down to us from generations. And many times we pay a cost for it. I'm going to ask you to read a chapter today that I forgot it was even there. Ezekiel 18. Just make you a note to read that. It won't take you 10 minutes this afternoon. Ezekiel 18. And the prophet is talking, and he's talking to Israel, and he says, it's a great day. And he says, because, and he uses this illustration, he says, there's a father, and he's a very righteous man, and he lists all the things he doesn't do, and he says, he will be rewarded, he will be in heaven because he's a righteous man. He says, but he has a son who did just the opposite, and did all these terrible things. And he will be punished for what he did. But this guy then has a son, it turns out his grandson, who's a very righteous young man. And said, he will not be held accountable for what his father did, but he'll be rewarded for what he did. You get what he's saying? The generations and what they've passed down to us. We're not held accountable for that. For what your mom or your dad or your brothers or your grandfathers or your grandmothers or whoever it is that passed down, if it was bad things, we're not held accountable for those things. They make a difference, yes, but we're not held down by those things. If they did those things and you're still carrying them, put them down. Move on. Forgive. And get on with life. Living and allowing those things to control you is worthless. Now, we've talked about what a stronghold is, and we've identified where they come from. Now I got a few suggestions of how to overcome them. Verse here says, a wise man attacks the city of the mighty and pulls down the stronghold in which they trust. First thing is this. And the first thing is this, it's possible to destroy the strongholds in your life because we fight with God's power. Number one is just recognize the lie that's in your life. Be honest enough with yourself to say it out loud. I'm living a lie. I believe these things. Say them out loud. That I've made myself this way, or somebody else has done these things. Stop justifying it and call it for what it is. Find God's truth. That's why the morning is such a good time, an important time. Find the scriptures that speak to you. If you're an anxious person, if you find yourself worrying, then search the Bible. Find the places that speaks about worry. If you have trust issues, find stuff about trust. If you have problems with seeing yourself as valuable in God's sight, find those verses, read those verses, study those verses, have them before you, find the truth, and then finally reinforce it with community. Do you know why AA is so successful? Do you know why Narcotics Anonymous, all these, you know why the porn addiction sites to help men get off porn are so valuable and so effective? Because it brings community together. There's somebody there to share the story with you, to be in the fight with you. And that applies to getting involved with and reinforcing the church that you're in. If you want to tear down a stronghold in your life, get involved in church. Go even deeper. Get involved in a small group with a Sunday school class. Make life even smaller and more tighter that way. This is how we begin to tear down the strongholds. Well, coming time to I've just got to wrap things up here. This week, Vicki Matthews called Eric and I. She said, I want to show you something on a video on YouTube. And she pulled a video, and there's a preacher, a Scottish preacher, I think, because when I say Scottish, I don't know if that's English or Scottish or Irish, or I don't know. But anyway, he was preaching, and he was talking about the thief on the cross, the criminal on the cross and hung beside Jesus. And he was talking about that this guy had known Jesus for just the hours on the cross and ends up in paradise. And that talks about the grace of God. But as I thought about that, I was just thinking about what I was going to be preaching today. And I just thought about this. Jesus hung on the cross for 6 hours. Somewhere in the during of that 6 hours, it says that both criminals in the crowd mocked and made fun of Jesus. So the two guys hanging there, they mocked Jesus. Somewhere later in that day, one of them had a change of thinking and said to the other one when he was mocking Jesus, he says, "Why are you doing this? We're getting what we deserve, but he's a good man. Jesus, will you remember me in your kingdom?" It really made me think, of course, about the grace of God. But here's a criminal hanging beside Jesus, and he has a change of thinking all the way from just hours before mocking Jesus to defending him. What was the stronghold in this man's life? We know it carried him to the cross. But he broke down that stronghold and came to Jesus. And if he can do it, we can do it. We can do it.